Have you ever truly seen the person refilling your water glass? The one whose hands are steady as they clear your plates, whose presence is designed to be unobtrusive, a ghost in the grand theatre of your life. We build empires of steel and glass, certain of their foundations, never suspecting that the most important truth might be held in the memory of the quietest person in the room. Arthur Sterling, the third-generation titan of Sterling Holdings, believed his legacy was as solid as the Boston granite his grandfather had built upon. His future was the Sterling Spire, a skyscraper that would pierce the New England sky, a testament to his family's unassailable vision. But he was wrong. A lie, buried for 30 years under layers of concrete, ambition, and a father's silence, was about to be unearthed. And the person holding the shovel wasn't a corporate rival or a crusading journalist. She was a 22-year-old waitress with ink-stained fingers and eyes that saw the stress fractures in everything, including his life. When she used a handful of sugar cubes to explain why his billion-dollar tower would fail, she didn't just challenge his engineering. She threatened to bring his entire world crashing down. The hushed reverence of L'Étoile was a carefully orchestrated symphony of clinking crystal silver, murmured pleasantries, and the scent of money. It was Arthur Sterling's natural habitat. Perched on the 52nd floor of a rival's building, the restaurant offered a panoramic view of the Boston skyline, a view that, in 6 months, would be dominated by his own creation, the Sterling Spire. He ran a hand over the starched linen tablecloth, his cufflink, a small gold compass, catching the light. Control. It was his father's mantra, his grandfather's creed, and the very air Arthur breathed. Across the table, his 17-year-old daughter, Lily, was a portrait of carefully contained rebellion. She wasn't looking at the glittering city below. She was sketching on a napkin with a charcoal pencil she'd produced from her worn leather satchel. Her hair, a cascade of dark curls, fell over her face, a curtain against his world. "Lily, put that away," Arthur said, his voice low but edged with the steel that made board members tremble. "Mr. Tanaka will be here any moment. We're securing the final funding for the Spire's atrium. I need you to be present." Lily didn't look up. Her pencil strokes were quick, confident. "I am present. I'm just improving the view." She held up the napkin. It wasn't a doodle. It was a rendering of the skyline, but with a bridge of impossible grace and fragility connecting 2 of the major towers. It was beautiful, ethereal, and utterly useless in his world. "This isn't an art class," he clipped, the familiar spike of frustration rising. "This is the foundation of your future. You're a Sterling. You're meant to build things that last, not fantasies." "Maybe your things won't last," she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. "Maybe the foundation is cracked." Before he could retort, a shadow fell over their table. "More water, Mr. Sterling." The voice was soft, almost melodic, with a strange precision in its cadence. Arthur glanced up, ready with a dismissive nod, but his gaze snagged. The waitress was young, early 20s at most, with a cascade of blonde hair pinned back in a severe but not quite tamed bun. Her uniform was immaculate, but it was her eyes that held him. They were a startling shade of grey, the colour of a stormy sea, and they weren't looking at him with the practiced deference he expected. They were scanning the room. Not the patrons, but the structure itself. The long, unsupported ceiling beams, the vast plate-glass windows, the very bones of the building. Her name tag read, Clara. "Just the water, thank you," he said, his tone a degree colder to re-establish the proper order of things. She nodded, her movements efficient and graceful as she refilled their glasses. As she leaned over to reach Lily's glass, her sleeve brushed the napkin. She paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes flicking down to Lily's drawing. A flicker of something, not surprise but recognition, crossed her face before being instantly suppressed. "That's a beautiful concept," she said, quietly to Lily, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "The tensile strength would be a nightmare, but the aesthetic is perfect." Lily's head shot up, her eyes wide with surprise. No one ever spoke the language of her art. "You think so? My dad says it's a fantasy." The waitress Clara gave a small, sad smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced at Arthur, a quick, unreadable assessment. "The greatest structures began as fantasies. The trick is convincing the physics to agree." She straightened up, her professional mask back in place. "Enjoy your evening." She moved away, disappearing into the choreographed ballet of the waitstaff. Mr. Tanaka arrived, a portly man with a warm smile and a ruthless reputation. The conversation turned to interest rates, material sourcing, and the projected Q3 profits from the Spire's commercial leases. Arthur was in his element, a master conductor of capital and ambition. Yet his focus was fractured. He found himself watching the waitress. He noticed things. The way she stacked plates, not just by size, but by weight distribution, creating a perfectly balanced, stable tower on her tray. The way she navigated the crowded floor, her path a study in fluid dynamics, never a wasted step. When a busboy dropped a tray of glasses, she didn't just jump back. Her eyes immediately darted up to a massive crystal chandelier hanging nearby, as if calculating the acoustic vibration's effect on its moorings. "Your daughter is quiet, Sterling-san," Mr. Tanaka observed, following his gaze. Arthur forced a smile. "She's contemplative. She has a great appreciation for design." It was a lie, but a necessary one. He couldn't very well admit his only heir preferred charcoal to concrete. An hour later, the deal was sealed with a handshake. Mr. Tanaka, pleased, excused himself. Arthur, flush with victory, turned to his daughter. "You see, Lily, that is how you build a legacy." Lily was staring at her napkin, a deep frown on her face. "She was right," she whispered. "The physics won't agree." She began sketching again, this time adding support trusses and calculating stress points. "It's the lateral wind load. I didn't account for it." Arthur's victory soured. His daughter was getting an impromptu engineering lesson from a waitress. "It's a drawing, Lily. It doesn't matter." "But it does," she insisted, her voice rising with a passion he hadn't heard in years. "It has to be real in my head, or it's just a lie." She understood that. Frustration boiled over. He was trying to hand her an empire, and she was obsessed with the structural integrity of a napkin drawing. He signaled for the check, his movements sharp and angry. It was Clara who brought it. She placed the leather billfold on the table, her expression neutral. As she turned to leave, Arthur stopped her. The word came out before he could think. "Who are you?" Clara froze, her back to him. She turned slowly, her face a carefully blank canvas. "I'm Clara, sir, your waitress." "Don't play games with me," Arthur pressed, his CEO voice emerging. It was the voice that dissected weaknesses and exposed falsehoods. "Tensile strength, lateral wind load. You're not just a waitress." A flicker of fear, raw and potent, crossed her face. "I read a lot. It's a hobby." "That wasn't hobby-level knowledge," Arthur countered. He gestured at the room around them. "When you look at this building, what do you see?" She hesitated, her eyes darting towards the manager's station. It was a silent plea for rescue. But Arthur wouldn't let her go. He saw a puzzle, an anomaly, and he hated anomalies. "Tell me," he commanded. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. Her voice dropped, taking on the clinical precision he'd heard earlier. I see a design that prioritizes aesthetics over safety. The main ceiling beam over tables 12 through 16 has a span of over 60 feet with no central support. It's relying entirely on the sheer strength of the western load-bearing wall. The panoramic windows are triple-paned, but they're set in steel frames that will have a higher thermal expansion rate than the reinforced concrete. Over 20 or 30 years, that differential will create micro-fractures in the foundation anchors. It's beautiful, but it's arrogant. She stopped, a flush creeping up her neck. I should get back to my station. Silence. Lily was staring at her, mouth agape, as if she were a magician who had just revealed the secrets of the universe. Arthur felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The building they were in was designed by Marcus Thorne, his chief rival, and this waitress had just performed a full structural autopsy on it in 30 seconds. He opened the billfold. The total was over $600. He took out his black Amex card, then paused. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card instead. He wrote a figure on the back, $500. My daughter, he began, choosing his words carefully, is struggling with her physics and calculus. The tutors I've hired are inadequate. They teach formulas. You seem to understand principles. I'll pay you $500 a week for 2 hours of your time. You can teach her how to see. Clara stared at the card as if it were a venomous snake. She shook her head, backing away. No, I can't. I'm sorry. 1,000, Arthur said, his competitive instincts taking over. He wasn't used to being told no. It's not about the money, she whispered, her eyes wide with that same fear he'd seen before. I can't. Please don't ask again. She turned and fled, nearly colliding with another waiter. Arthur watched her go, the puzzle becoming more complex, more intriguing. Who was this woman, so brilliant yet so terrified? Why was she hiding her mind behind an apron in a place like this? Dad, Lily said, her voice filled with awe. You have to hire her. I intend to, Arthur murmured, his gaze fixed on the retreating figure. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for his private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Jean, who specialized in making ghosts talk. Jean, it's Sterling, he said, his eyes narrowing. I have a job for you, a waitress at L'Etoile. Her name is Clara. No last name on the tag. Young, blonde, knows structural engineering like she invented it. I want to know everything. Where she went to school, who her family is, why she's pouring water for a living. And Jean, be discreet. I get the feeling she's a rabbit who knows what a trap looks like. As he ended the call, he glanced down at the table. Next to Lily's drawing of the impossible bridge was a small, perfect structure built from 4 sugar cubes. It was a cantilever, a design of exquisite balance and strength, left behind by the ghost he was now determined to hunt. He didn't know it yet, but he wasn't the hunter in this story. He and his entire legacy were the prey. The following week was a blur of concrete dust and stock market fluctuations. The Sterling spire was rising on schedule, a steel skeleton clawing its way into the Boston sky. Arthur spent his days in meetings, his nights reviewing blueprints that all felt inadequate now. He kept hearing the waitress's voice in his head. It's beautiful, but it's arrogant. He found himself questioning his own architects, pushing them on minute details of sheer stress and material fatigue until they looked at him with baffled exhaustion. Jean's preliminary report was thin, which only deepened the mystery. It's weird, Arthur, Jean had said over a secure line. The girl's a ghost, Clara Nowak, rents a room in a Dorchester triple-decker, pays cash, works 2 jobs. L'Etoile at night, a greasy spoon diner in Southie for breakfast shifts. No credit cards, no social media, no student loans. She has a high school diploma from a public school in Worcester, and that's it. According to the records, her academic performance was average. It doesn't scan. Average doesn't get you a spontaneous dissertation on thermal expansion, Arthur had grumbled. Dig deeper. Family. That's where it gets sad, Jean said. Parents died in a car crash when she was 16, a drunk driver. She was in the car, spent a few months in the hospital, then bounced around the foster system until she aged out. She's completely alone. The information settled uneasily in Arthur's gut. A brilliant orphan hiding in plain sight. It felt like a story, and he suspected a few key chapters were missing. His obsession with Clara was beginning to bleed into his relationship with Lily. To his surprise, Lily had taken the waitress's words to heart. Her sketchbook was now filled not with fantasy bridges, but with detailed analyses of existing structures. She was applying mathematical principles to her art, trying to make her visions plausible. She had even enrolled in an online physics course. I'm trying to convince the physics to agree, she'd told him, a quiet challenge in her eyes. He decided to force the issue. That Thursday, he instructed his driver to take him not to his office, but to South Boston. The diner was called The Daily Grind, a squat little building that smelled of burnt coffee and bacon. It was the polar opposite of L'Étoile. Here, the plates were thick stoneware, and the clientele were construction workers and grizzled longshoremen. And there she was, Clara. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded blue apron over jeans and a t-shirt. She looked younger here, more vulnerable, without the armor of a fine dining establishment. She was laughing with a burly man at the counter, a genuine, unguarded sound that was more beautiful than anything he'd heard at L'Étoile. Then she saw him. The laugh died in her throat, the light in her eyes extinguished, replaced by the familiar wariness. She grabbed a coffee pot and moved to the far end of the diner, her back to him. Arthur slid into a cracked vinyl booth. He didn't belong here, and every eye in the place was on his tailored suit and Italian leather shoes. He ignored them. A different waitress, a woman with a kind, tired face, took his order. He asked for coffee. He waited for 20 minutes. Clara never came near his table. He could see her in the reflection of the chrome napkin dispenser, her movements stiff, her shoulders tight. She was deliberately avoiding him. Fine. He changed tactics. He pulled out his phone and called Lily. "Where are you?" she asked, sounding surprised. "The Daily Grind in Southie," he said, watching Clara's reflection. "I need you to bring your physics textbook. We're having a study session." 30 minutes later, Lily slid into the booth opposite him, looking around with wide-eyed curiosity. She'd never been to a place like this in her life. She placed the heavy textbook on the table with a thud. "Okay, Dad, what's this about?" she asked, a suspicious edge to her voice. "You're struggling with torque and rotational motion," he said, opening the book to a random chapter. "Let's work through problem 7. It was a transparently clumsy ploy, but it worked. The problem was genuinely difficult, involving a series of gears and levers. They struggled with it, their conversation growing louder, more frustrated. Arthur intentionally raised his voice. "The formula for angular momentum is clear, Lily. Why can't you see how it applies?" "Because it's just letters, Dad. It doesn't mean anything." From the corner of his eye, he saw Clara hesitate. She was clearing a nearby table, and she'd stopped, her head cocked. She was listening. He pushed harder. "This is basic mechanics. If you can't grasp this, you'll never understand the principles of engineering." That was the hook. He saw her shoulders tense. He saw her glance at Lily's frustrated face. He saw the internal battle in her eyes, the fear of being seen versus the instinct of a natural-born teacher to solve a problem. The teacher won. She walked over, a pot of coffee in her hand. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're thinking about it backwards." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon?" Clara ignored him and spoke directly to Lily. She picked up a fork, a knife, and a spoon from the caddy on the table. "Forget the book. Look at this." She balanced the knife on the spoon, creating a simple lever. Torque isn't a force pushing forward. It's a force that wants to twist. The equation looks complicated because it's describing a circle, not a straight line. "Where are you putting your pivot point?" Lily pointed to a diagram in the book. "Here." "Wrong," Clara said softly. "That's the obvious pivot. The trick in this problem is that the entire system is rotating around a secondary, invisible pivot. The equation wants you to account for two kinds of spin at once." She used the cutlery to demonstrate, a complex dance of silver that suddenly made the abstract problem tangible. You don't have one angular momentum. You have two. You have to solve for the smaller one first, then treat that entire system as a single point on the larger wheel. Lily's eyes lit up with dawning comprehension. "Oh my God. So I have to nest the equations." "Exactly," Clara breathed, a real smile touching her lips. "It's not a line of code, it's a story. One chapter is inside the other." She seemed to forget Arthur was there. For 5 minutes, she and Lily were in their own world, scribbling on a napkin, the diner fading into the background. Clara didn't just give answers. She asked questions, leading Lily to discover the solution herself. The transformation in his daughter was astonishing. She was alive, engaged, her mind firing on all cylinders. Finally, Lily slammed her pencil down in triumph. "I get it. The answer is 17.2 Newton meters." Clara beamed, a radiant, unguarded expression of pure pride. And in that moment, Arthur saw the woman she was supposed to be, a brilliant professor, a groundbreaking engineer, a leader. Not a waitress hiding from the world. The moment was shattered by the bell over the diner's door. A man walked in, his face florid, his movements unsteady. He reeked of stale beer. He stumbled towards the counter, catching sight of Clara. "Hey, Nowak," he slurred, his voice thick with malice. "Still slumming it. I thought a genius like you would be building bridges by now. Oh, wait, that was your old man's job, wasn't it? And we all know how that turned out." The color drained from Clara's face. She looked like she'd been struck. The light in her eyes vanished, replaced by a haunted, desolate emptiness. "Leave it alone, Frank," she said, her voice trembling. "Or what?" he sneered. "You gonna get your dad to sue me?" "Oh, right." He laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. Arthur stood up. He was a good 6 inches taller than the man, and radiated an aura of cold, absolute power. "That's enough. Get out." Frank blinked, momentarily taken aback by the expensive suit and the command in Arthur's voice. "Who the hell are you?" "He's the man who is about to own the company you work for, and whose first act as owner will be to fire you, unless you are out that door in 5 seconds, Arthur said, his voice deadly quiet. It was a complete bluff, but it was delivered with the utter certainty of a man who bought and sold companies like other men bought shoes. The drunk's bravado crumbled. He saw Arthur, then Lily, then the scribbled napkin full of equations. A flicker of confused fear crossed his face. He muttered an oath and shuffled out of the diner. The diner was silent. Everyone was staring. Clara stood frozen, her face ashen, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She looked at Arthur, and her expression wasn't one of gratitude. It was one of pure, unadulterated terror. "What have you done?" she whispered. then turned and ran into the kitchen, the swing door flapping wildly behind her. Arthur sat back down, his heart pounding. He looked at Lily, who was staring at the kitchen door with a look of profound sympathy. "Dad," she said softly. "Who is her father?" Arthur didn't have an answer, but he knew Jean would. He pulled out his phone. "Jean," he said when the investigator answered. "Clara Nowak, her father. The man in the diner said he was a bridge builder. Find him. Find out what happened." An hour later, Jean called back. His voice was different, tense. "Arthur, you need to hear this in person. This isn't a phone conversation. I'm sending you a file. Look at the second attachment first. It's a news article from 10 years ago." Arthur opened his email. The file was encrypted, as always. He entered the password. The first document was a personnel file. The second was a scanned newspaper clipping from the Boston Herald. The headline hit him like a physical blow. "Renowned architect Elias Vance dead in apparent suicide." The article was brief. Elias Vance, a once promising architect, had been found in his workshop. He had lost a major contract for a new downtown skyscraper, a project that had reportedly been his life's work, and had fallen into a deep depression. He was survived by his 16-year-old daughter, Clara. Arthur's blood ran cold. He clicked on the first attachment. It was a grainy photo from an old architectural magazine. A younger, happier Elias Vance stood proudly next to a stunningly detailed model of a skyscraper. It was a revolutionary design, a tower that twisted elegantly towards the sky, its form both powerful and graceful. It was the Sterling Spire. No, not the spire. It was the original design, the one his own father, Robert Sterling, had submitted to the City Planning Board 30 years ago. The design that had won them the contract, launched their empire into the stratosphere, and become the cornerstone of the Sterling legacy. But the name on the plaque next to the model wasn't Robert Sterling. It was Elias Vance. The room began to spin. The foundation wasn't cracked. It was a lie. His entire life, his family's name, the billion-dollar tower he was currently building, it was all built on the genius of a dead man. A man whose daughter was now serving coffee in a Southie diner, hiding from a world that had crushed her. He looked at the photo of Elias Vance, then back at the newspaper clipping. He understood the haunted look in Clara's eyes. He understood her fear. She wasn't hiding from poverty or a troubled past. She was hiding from him, from the Sterling name. And he finally understood the mission she was on. She wasn't just surviving. She was waiting, and the equation she was trying to solve wasn't in any textbook. It was an equation of justice, and he was on the wrong side of it. The revelation struck Arthur with the force of a physical impact. He sat in his silent, temperature-controlled office, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of lies, and felt the granite foundations of his world turn to sand. His father, Robert Sterling, wasn't just a hard-nosed businessman. He was a thief. He hadn't just outmaneuvered a rival. He had stolen a man's soul and left his daughter an orphan. The Sterling Spire, his magnum opus, was not a monument to his family's vision, but a tombstone for another's. The compass cufflink on his wrist suddenly felt like a shackle. He spent the next 2 days in a fugue state, locked in his private study with decades of old files. He unearthed the original proposal for the first Sterling Tower. There they were, Elias Vance's initial design submissions, stamped as rejected. And then, 3 months later, a new set of blueprints submitted by his father. They were nearly identical, but with a few crucial, and as Arthur now realized, inferior modifications. His father had dumbed down the genius, making it cheaper to build, sanding off the revolutionary edges that had made Vance's design so unique. He had stolen a masterpiece and traced it into a copy. Jean's final report confirmed the timeline. Vance had sued. The lawsuit was quietly settled out of court for a pittance. The records sealed. A non-disclosure agreement was signed. A month later, Elias Vance was dead. The official story was suicide. Jean's note in the margin was chilling. The PI who investigated the death for the insurance company noted inconsistencies, but was pressured to close the case. That PI retired to the Bahamas, a rich man, 6 months later. It wasn't a suicide, it was a silencing. And Clara had been in the car with her mother when she died. A 16-year-old girl who lost her father's legacy, then her mother, all in the space of a year. The world hadn't just crushed her, it had systematically dismantled her life, piece by piece, all for the sake of the sterling name. His first instinct was damage control. Lawyers, public relations, a quiet settlement for Clara. He could bury this. He could pay her off, ensure her silence, and the spire would continue its ascent. It was the sterling way. It was what his father would have done. But then he thought of Lily, her face illuminated with the joy of discovery, as Clara explained the poetry of physics with a handful of cutlery. He thought of Clara's own face, that brief, radiant smile before the world reminded her who she was supposed to be. He was building a legacy for his daughter on a foundation of theft and death. He couldn't give her a poisoned chalice, no matter how gilded it was. For the first time in his life, Arthur Sterling was truly lost. His compass was broken. He found Clara not at the diner, but at a small public library in Dorchester. She was in the engineering section, surrounded by towering stacks of books, a small island of intense concentration in the quiet room. She was sketching on a notepad, her brow furrowed. She didn't see him approach. He stood there for a moment, just watching her. She was tracing the lines of a suspension bridge, her fingers moving with an innate understanding of force and form. She was her father's daughter. "Clara," he said softly. Her head snapped up. The now familiar fear was there, but this time it was mixed with something else. Defiance. She didn't run. She closed her notebook, her chin held high. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice cold. "Are you here to offer me another tutoring job, or have you come to finish what your father started?" The directness of the attack winded him. "You know." "I've always known," she replied, her voice trembling slightly but her gaze unwavering. "My father's original blueprints, his journals. I have them all. I've spent the last 6 years of my life studying his work, learning his methods, trying to find a way to prove what your family did. Why work at L'Etoile? Why put yourself in my world?" A bitter smile touched her lips. "To watch you, to understand you, and because it's in Marcus Thorne's building. He was my father's junior partner, the one who convinced him to pitch his design to your father in the first place. I believe Thorne was the one who sold him out. I was looking for proof against both of you." The pieces clicked into place. Marcus Thorne, his rival, wasn't just a competitor. He was the serpent in the garden, the architect of the original sin. "Clara, I didn't know," Arthur said, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. "My father, he never spoke of it. I swear to you." "Does it matter?" she shot back, her voice cracking. "You're still building a tower based on his design. You're still living in a world he paid for with his life." He deserved that. He deserved all of it. He sank into the chair opposite her, the powerful CEO suddenly a supplicant. "What do you want, Clara? Money? A public acknowledgement? Name it. It's yours." She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw the full depth of her grief, the crushing weight she had carried alone for a decade. "I want his name back," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I want the world to know that Elias Vance was a genius, not a failure. I want him to have the legacy your father stole from him." She took a ragged breath. "And I want to see the sterling spire torn down, piece by piece." The demand hung in the air, an impossible ultimatum: destroy his life's work, annihilate his company's flagship project. It was corporate suicide. "I can't do that," he said, his voice strained. "It would bankrupt the company. Thousands of people would lose their jobs. My legacy, my daughter's future." "Your daughter's future was built on my father's grave," she said, her voice hardening again. "You can't have it both ways, Mr. Sterling. You can't acknowledge the truth and keep the fruits of the lie." She stood up, gathering her books. "I have the proof, Mr. Sterling, the original dated blueprints. My father's journals detailing his meetings with your father and with Thorne. I was planning to leak it to the press next month, just before your final funding review. But now that you know, you have a choice. You can either be the man who exposes the truth himself, or the man who gets exposed by it." She walked away, leaving him alone in the echoing silence of the library. He was trapped. Clara had him, and she was right. But there had to be another way, a way to honor her father without destroying his own. He spent the next 48 hours in a frantic search for a third option, a way to balance the scales. He conferred with Jean, with his most trusted legal counsel, and with Lily. It was Lily who provided the spark. "You can't tear it down, Dad," she said, looking at the half-finished spire from their penthouse window. "It's already there. It's part of the city. But what if you changed it? What if you made it better? What if you made it what it was supposed to be?" An idea began to form, a plan so audacious, so outrageously expensive and risky, it could either save them or ruin them completely. He had to get Clara to listen. He knew words wouldn't be enough. He needed a gesture. He called a crisis meeting with his executive board and his chief architects. He projected Elias Vance's original design onto the main screen in the boardroom. "This," he announced to the stunned room, "is the real Sterling Spire, and we are going to build it." The plan was to halt construction and re-engineer the top third of the tower to match Vance's visionary, twisting design. The very design his father had deemed too complex, too expensive. It would mean a 9-figure loss, a massive delay, and a public relations nightmare. But it was the only path he could see. He needed to present this to Clara. He needed a neutral ground, a place of power. He chose L'Etoile. He booked the entire restaurant for the evening, and he invited one other guest, Marcus Thorne. The stage was set for a final, public confrontation. The air in the empty L'Etoile was thick with tension. It was just 3 tables, set far apart in the cavernous room. Arthur and Lily at one, Marcus Thorne, radiating smug confidence, at another, and Clara, who had been brought by a private car, looking wary and out of place, at a third. She wore a simple black dress, her only armor. "A private party, Arthur," Thorne began, his voice oozing false cordiality. "To what do I owe the honor? Celebrating your impending victory? I hear the spire is on schedule." "We're here to discuss a change in schedule, Marcus," Arthur said, his voice calm and even. He looked at Clara. "And to correct a 30-year-old error." Thorne's smile tightened. He followed Arthur's gaze to Clara. A flicker of recognition, then contempt, crossed his face. "Well, well. Clara Vance, I haven't seen you since your father's funeral. Still fighting his lost causes, I see. I'd have thought you'd have learned your lesson by now. Some people are meant to build, others are meant to pour water." The cruelty of the remark was breathtaking. Clara flinched but held her ground. My father wasn't a lost cause, she said, her voice clear and strong. He was a visionary, and you were his partner. I was his partner in a fantasy, Thorne sneered. I did what was necessary to turn an unbuildable dream into a profitable reality. Your father was a brilliant artist, my dear, but a terrible businessman. He couldn't compromise. Robert Sterling understood compromise. That's why his name is on a tower and your father's is on a tombstone. This was it. The moment of truth. That's where you're wrong, Marcus, Arthur said, standing up. He gestured to the head waiter, who dimmed the main lights. A projector whirred to life, casting an image onto the far wall. It was Elias Vance's original, breathtaking design for the spire. This is the future of Sterling Holdings, Arthur announced, his voice ringing through the silent restaurant. We are halting construction on the current design. We are re-engineering the tower to match its original brilliant concept. The project will be delayed, the cost will be astronomical, but it will be done. Thorne stared at the projection, his face a mask of disbelief, which quickly morphed into rage. Are you insane? That design is structurally unsound. It was never approved. It was never properly attempted, a new voice said. Clara was on her feet, walking towards the projection. My father solved the engineering problems. The core structural support system he designed was revolutionary. You and Robert Sterling were just too cheap. The world did not crumble in silence. It fractured with the blinding pop of 1,000 camera flashes. The groan from the ceiling beam above was a bass note in a sudden, shrieking symphony of shouted questions, the frantic clicking of shutters, and the stampede of feet on plush carpet. For a split second, Arthur saw the scene as if from a great height. The terrified face of the manager, Dubois, ushering patrons out a side door. The fleeing, pathetic figure of Marcus Thorne, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief, being intercepted at the main entrance by the stoic, immovable form of Jean, and Clara standing beside him, a still point in the swirling chaos. She wasn't triumphant. She was terrifyingly calm, her body rigid, her stormy grey eyes fixed on the hairline crack, spreading like a dark vein across the pristine white ceiling. She had thrown the stone, and now she was watching the avalanche she had started, her expression one of grim, absolute finality. She hadn't come here with a plan to escape. This was the end of her equation. Mr. Sterling, is it true? Was the original design stolen? What does this mean for the spire? Is Sterling Holdings facing bankruptcy? The questions were sharks circling, sensing blood. The old Arthur would have met them with a wall of steel, a curt no comment, a display of unbreachable power. But the old Arthur was a lie, a hollow structure just like the ceiling above them, and the cracks were showing. He looked at Clara, at the decade of silent, crushing weight she had carried, and he knew what he had to do. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply stepped forward, into the epicenter of the glare, and held up a hand. A fragile silence fell, hungry and expectant. My name is Arthur Sterling, he began, his voice not the booming command of a CEO, but the measured tone of a man delivering a eulogy for his father, for his name, for the life he had known. And for 30 years, my family has been telling a lie written in concrete and steel across the skyline of this city. He took a breath, the flashbulbs still popping, searing the moment onto his retinas. He felt Clara's presence at his shoulder, not as an accuser, but as a witness, as the truth. Tonight we begin to tell the truth. The Sterling Spire, as you know it, is dead. He paused, letting the weight of the words land. Long live the Vance Spire. The aftermath was not a cleansing fire. It was a slow, agonizing drowning. Arthur spent the night not in a boardroom, but in a sterile conference room with a team of lawyers whose faces grew progressively greyer as he laid out the unvarnished history of Elias Vance. He spared nothing, not his father's theft, not the sham lawsuit, not the chilling implications of Jean's report on Vance's death. He was systematically dismantling the foundations of his own house, stone by painful stone, when he finally returned to the penthouse as the first grey light of dawn bled over the harbour. The city looked alien to him. The Sterling Tower, the one his father had built, seemed to mock him, a monument to a crime. Lily was waiting for him, wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, her sketchbook open on her lap. She didn't ask what had happened. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with a sad, ancient wisdom. "Are you okay?" she asked. "No," he answered, the single word costing him more than any billion-dollar deal. "But I will be." He sank into the armchair opposite her, the tailored suit feeling like a costume from another man's life. "I destroyed your inheritance tonight, Lily." "No, you didn't," she said softly, turning her sketchbook towards him. On the page was a drawing, not of a building, but of a kintsugi bowl, a Japanese ceramic repaired with gold, the cracks celebrated as part of its history. You just showed where the cracks were, so now we can start filling them with something real. That morning, the market opened, and Sterling Holdings fell off a cliff. It dropped 40% in the first hour of trading, a bloodbath of flashing red numbers on every screen. His phone vibrated with a fury, a cascade of messages from board members, investors, and bankers, ranging from panicked to apoplectic. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Clara, meanwhile, had been escorted home by one of Jean's silent operatives. She walked into her small room in the Dorchester triple-decker, the scent of stale coffee and her neighbour's cooking clinging to the air, and felt the world tilt on its axis. For 6 years, this room had been her sanctuary, her library, her war room. It was where she had pored over her father's journals, memorizing every line, every calculation, every expression of his brilliant, broken heart. Now, it felt like a cage. She turned on the small television, and her own face stared back at her from the screen, a grainy photo pulled from her high school yearbook, next to the headline, "The Waitress Who Toppled an Empire." She felt a wave of vertigo so profound she had to grip the edge of her desk. She had won. The truth was out. So why did she feel like she was suffocating? The anonymity that had been her shield for so long had been vaporized. She was no longer a ghost. She was a story, a target. Her phone, a cheap prepaid device, buzzed, an unknown number. She almost threw it against the wall, but some instinct made her answer. "Hello." Her voice was a reedy whisper. "Clara. It's Arthur Sterling." His voice was frayed, exhausted. "They're coming for me. The board. They'll try to sever me from the company, bury this whole thing, and paint you as a lunatic. They will try to erase you and your father all over again." "What do you want from me?" she asked, her knuckles white where she gripped the phone. "I'm going into the boardroom in 1 hour," he said. "I'm not asking you to be there. But I need to know. The Vance spire, your father's real design. Can it be built? Not as a fantasy on a blueprint. In reality, with the existing foundation. Is it possible?" It was the first time anyone had asked her that question with genuine belief. It wasn't about money or fame. It was about the physics, the truth, a flicker of the architect, the engineer, the problem solver ignited within her. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its former strength. "The core is already in place. The load-bearing structure is compatible. It would require a helical exoskeleton integrated into the upper third. The torsional dampening would need to be recalibrated, but yes, it can be done. Thank you, Arthur said, and hung up. The Sterling Holdings boardroom was a tomb. The long mahogany table reflected the grim, furious faces of the 12 board members, men and women who had served with his father, who had built their fortunes on the Sterling name. Arthur walked in and took his place at the head of the table, not with his customary authority, but with the quiet resolve of a man walking to his own execution. "This is a betrayal of everything your father stood for, Arthur," bellowed a man named Henderson, his face the color of plum. "You've wiped out billions in shareholder value overnight for the sake of some Waitress's fantasy." "It was not a fantasy, Howard," Arthur said calmly. "It was a crime, my father's crime, and we have been profiting from it for 3 decades. We need to issue a statement," a sharp-faced woman named Eleanor countered, her voice like ice. "Discredit the girl. Claim temporary insanity on your part. Stress-induced delusion. We can salvage this. We'll settle with her for an obscene amount of money. She'll sign an NDA, and this will all go away." Arthur looked at their faces, at the panic in their eyes. They weren't evil. They were just men and women who had built their lives on a comfortable lie and were terrified of the truth. "No," he said. "There will be no more lies." He stood up and walked to the room's display screen. With a tap on his tablet, he brought up Elias Vance's design. It filled the wall, elegant and audacious, a stark contrast to the brutalist towers outside. "This is the new direction of the company. We are not scrapping the spire. We are correcting it. We will build this. And we will do it with Elias Vance's daughter, Clara Vance, as a lead consultant and partner in the project." The room erupted. Shouts of "Resign" and "You've lost your mind" echoed off the wood-panelled walls. Arthur let the storm break. When it subsided, he spoke again, his voice resonating with a new kind of power, one born not of inheritance but of conviction. "You can all vote to remove me, and you will likely succeed. But I will walk out of this room and hold my own press conference. I will release every document, every blueprint, every page of Elias Vance's journals. I will personally fund Clara Vance's lawsuit against this company. The scandal will not die. It will metastasize. It will kill Sterling Holdings. Or you can stay. You can weather this storm with me. You can be part of the company that chose truth over profit, that chose to build something magnificent from the wreckage of a lie. Your shares are worthless today. But a year from now, 5 years from now, the Vance spire will be a symbol, not of our shame, but of our redemption. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a legacy worth investing in." He looked each of them in the eye. He saw doubt, fear, but also a flicker of something else, a grudging respect. He had offered them not an easy way out, but a difficult path to honor. The vote to remove him failed, 7-5. It was not a victory. It was a stay of execution. The months that followed were a grueling war of attrition. The story of Marcus Thorne's involvement in Elias Vance's death became a separate, darker scandal, and Arthur had to testify before a grand jury, laying bare his father's sins under oath. Each word felt like a betrayal of his blood, yet a confirmation of his soul. He created the Vance Sterling Center for Architectural Innovation, a new division funded by his own personal fortune. He offered Clara the position of executive director, with a seat on the board and a significant equity stake. She refused, for 3 weeks. She stayed in her room, the world outside too loud, too demanding. It was Lily who finally broke through. She didn't call. She just showed up at the Dorchester apartment with 2 cups of coffee and her sketchbook. She didn't talk about the spire or the board meetings. She just sat with Clara, sketching the view from her window, and talked about art and physics and the terrifying beauty of a blank page. "My dad doesn't know how to fix this," Lily said, not looking up from her drawing. "He knows how to tear things down. He just tore down his whole world. But you know how to build. He needs you. And I think you need this. Not for him, for your father, for you." Clara finally accepted the position. Her first day was a trial by fire. She walked into the gleaming Sterling headquarters in a simple, off-the-rack suit that felt like a costume, her father's worn leather satchel clutched in her hand. The architects and engineers, men twice her age, looked at her with a mixture of pity and resentment. She was the story, the symbol. They didn't see the genius. In her first design meeting, presenting her father's revised plans for the helical exoskeleton, the lead engineer, a man named Peterson, openly scoffed. "It's theoretically elegant, Ms. Vance, but it's a logistical nightmare. The sheer number of custom-fabricated joints would push the timeline back 2 years and the budget into the stratosphere." Clara froze. The room was silent, all eyes on her. This was the test. The old Clara would have retreated, her voice silenced by the weight of male authority. But as she stood there, she could feel the presence of her father, could hear his voice in his journals. They will always choose the easy path. You must force them to see the beauty in the difficult one. She walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and began to draw. She didn't sketch a building. She sketched the molecular structure of a seashell. "Nature has already solved this problem," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "A nautilus shell grows in a logarithmic spiral. Its strength comes not from resisting pressure, but from distributing it along a continuous, expanding curve. We don't need 1,000 unique joints." She began to modify her father's design on the fly, simplifying, innovating. "We need a modular, interlocking system that follows the same principle. A spine. It will be stronger, cheaper, and faster to assemble." She filled the board with calculations, her hand moving with a certainty that silenced the room. When she was finished, she turned. Peterson was staring at the board, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from the equations to her, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at a waitress or a tragic story. He was looking at an architect. A year after the night at L'Etoile, the three of them stood on the open-air platform of the 70th floor. The sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city. The wind was a wild, clean song, whistling through the exposed steel latticework of the spire's twisting crown. It was beautiful. It was her father's. "I got the preliminary report from the wind tunnel tests," Clara said, her voice carrying easily over the wind. She wore a hard hat and a durable jacket over her clothes, and she had never looked more at home. "The helical design is performing 17% better against lateral wind load than we projected. My father, he over-engineered it. He built in a margin of safety even his own math said wasn't necessary." "He was building something to last," Arthur murmured, looking out at the city that now bore his family's complicated truth. Lily unrolled a sheet of vellum on a makeshift table, weighting the corners with pieces of scrap metal. It was her design for the memorial in the grand atrium. It was a vast, kinetic sculpture, a spiraling column of polished steel and captured light that was suspended from the ceiling. "It's tied into the tower's central sensor network," Lily explained. "It will subtly shift and move in response to the building's natural sway, the wind, even the vibrations of the city. It won't be a static statue of the past. It will be a living part of the building, always in motion. a constant conversation between the structure and the city. At the base, etched into a simple granite plinth, were two names, Elias Vance, Robert Sterling. Arthur stared at his father's name. "Are you sure, Lily?" "The foundation has to be honest," she said, looking from Arthur to Clara. "The story isn't just about a genius and a thief. It's also about a son who chose to tell the truth. That's part of the structure now, too. Forgetting him would be just another lie." Clara reached out and touched the vellum, her finger tracing the elegant lines of the sculpture. She looked at Arthur, and he saw in her eyes not forgiveness, that was too simple a word for the chasm between them, but a complex, hard-won understanding. An acceptance. They were partners, bound not by friendship, but by the shared, difficult work of building something true from something false. "You know," Arthur said, a rare, small smile touching his lips. "I heard they finally tore down Thorne's building, the one with L'Etoile. The inspectors found catastrophic flaws in the foundation anchors, exactly where you said they would be." Clara nodded, a ghost of a smile in return. "Some foundations are just built on sand." "And ours?" Arthur asked, the question hanging in the cold, clear air. She looked up at the magnificent, twisting spire above them, a masterpiece of physics and art that reached for the heavens. She looked at the city spreading out below, waiting for the tower to take its place. "Ours," Clara said, her voice full of a quiet, unshakable certainty, "is built on granite. Ask me again in 100 years." They stood in silence for a long moment, the three of them, a fractured and rebuilt family, watching the first stars emerge in the deepening twilight. The ghosts were still there, their whispers carried on the wind that swept through the steel bones of the tower, but they were no longer angry. They were simply part of the story, their names etched into the foundation, holding up the sky.